Locked On Pistons podcast. We are going to be joined by Howard Beck to talk all things Detroit Pistons, their young core, the coaching search, some interesting things about them next season. Stay tuned for all that in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I'm your host, Ku Cahill. You can find me over on Twitter at Ku Cahill. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. And if you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button, or you can leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks. Use promo code Locked On. So I have a very fun and interesting guest joining us today. We have Howard Beck joining us on the Locked On Pistons podcast today, formerly of Sports Illustrated, Bleacher Report, New York Times, and currently contributor to GQSports. And you'll probably find him a little bit on the Locked On Network over the next few weeks. Howard, how are you doing, man? Appreciate you coming on.
I'm doing great, Ku. Thanks for having me. Good to be with you.
Appreciate you, man. Appreciate you. All right, so let's go ahead and get right into this, man. So what are your thoughts right now on the Pistons' young core compared to the rest of the league moving forward? And when I say the rest of the league, obviously like the rest of the young cores across the league. We got the playoffs going on right now. You see a lot of good teams, obviously. So now you got the teams like the Pistons who are kind of sitting in the offseason trying to figure out how to take the next step moving forward. So what do you think about the team as it states right now?
It's a really hard one to answer in some respects, in that whatever the Pistons are going to become with this core, and let's assume for a moment that this is the kind of thing where, hey, we got to draft a bunch of guys over the course of several bad years, so we got a lot of high picks. Now let's just see what they can do together. Part of the difficulty of assessing that, even in the moment, is that the player who's probably the best of them is the guy who missed almost all of last season, Cade Cunningham. The guy who could become the best of them really depends on what's going to happen in the lottery in a week or so here, because the best player might not be on the roster yet. And so we have these kind of fun unknowns about the Pistons when we say, well, okay, how does their young core stack up? I think that, when you start to look across the league, and there's not a lot of teams that are in this particular category right now. Like the Thunder are a really interesting example to consider, in that the Thunder have not done a lot of maneuvers to try to just like start packing on veteran talent, right? They acquired Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at a young stage where his future his trajectory wasn't clear yet. He's turned into an absolute star, and along the way, some of their picks, Holmgren misses an entire season. Giddey looking pretty good. Jalen Williams obviously looking pretty good. So you can start to see it round into form because you now have a focal point in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, a guy that you can build around, and you've got some other young players showing various levels of promise and rapid development, to the point where, I'd be more interested with them in just like seeing what happens when Chet Holmgren plays, than in trying to rush the process or manufacture something. Like they're knocking on the door of the playoffs already. And so that's one model. Get a bunch of young guys, let them kind of figure things out over the course of a couple of years and develop. And if you've picked well and developed well, you've got your core. And then the decisions you have to make about who to add are that much clearer. The Pistons are in such an early stage, and they're so young, and their arguably best current player just missed almost an entire season. It makes it really hard to assess. And I don't envy the front office in trying to figure this out right now, because even if you have a ton of faith in Cade as being, let's say you believe he can be a top 20 player, a franchise star, a top 5 to top whatever point guard. Okay, if that's the case, he's your foundational piece and you can start building around him, and that kind of can simplify some things. But we don't even really know where he stands right now because of all the time missed. And he may come back a better player. My experience is that the guys who really care, who really work, who have, high motor, high work ethic, if they miss a year, they're not just going to come back healthy. They're going to come back healthy. And, oh, by the way, watch me shoot 40 from 3 now, or watch this post-up game I've been developing. Like, there's usually something else. So I don't know what Cade Cunningham's going to look like in October, but I'm intrigued to know that, or see that in a few months. That may change a lot. In the meantime, of course, they have all kinds of other decisions to make, which we can get into. But I don't know how to compare them to some of the other young cores, other than I think it's pretty promising. It's at least as promising as what the Rockets have, or they're in better shape than what the Magic have, or than the Hornets have. I don't know if we can quite put them in the Magic's category yet. They may be a tad behind them just because of the time that they've had to develop, and then they got a full season from Banchero and he looked fantastic, and they've got Franz Wagner. And so they've got, some core pieces that in Orlando, you can lock down and say, okay, I don't know where these guys ultimately top out, but I know these guys are foundational players, foundational high level players. And we can go from there. For the Pistons, I feel like it's still more of an exploratory stage right now.
So I think it's one of the teams you brought up is a team that a lot of Pistons fans, and myself included, have compared their rebuild or restore, that Troy Weaver likes to call it, to, and that's the OKC Thunder. Troy Weaver came from OKC. Yeah. He was a scout. And a lot of things you mentioned with OKC seems to be like the same type of way that Weaver's going about this. He's bringing in his own guys. He's drafting a lot of players. And his first draft in 2020, he goes out there and gets 2 extra first-round picks to get more of his guys. He trades one of those for another one of his guys, and James Wiseman. The Pistons have a very, very young team here, like you mentioned, and it seems like, at least right now, they could do all kinds of different things in the offseason, may just throw this completely out the window, but it seems like right now with Weaver is that his idea is, I'm going to get my guys, I'm going to get my young guys, I'm going to draft well because I'm a scout at the heart, so I'm going to pride myself on that. I'm going to get these guys, and we're going to develop, and we're going to win with our guys. If we're going to take the next step, we're going to take the next step with our guys. And I think that's the case that they're probably trying to go with, and I think that's really what OKC has done. And a lot of it has to do with, like you said, SGA, 24 years old, took that step to, like, superstar. Like, the dude was crazy this year. So SGA is a few years ahead of Cade Cunningham. I believe he's like 3 years older than Cade, and SGA is one of the comparisons that Cade has gotten. So I'm interested to see where he's at in a few years, but I do think the Pistons are kind of going down that same path of what OKC is trying to do, or what they are doing right now, and just developing their own guys and just piecing guys together and then getting guys around them that kind of enable their core guys to really play well. And I think that's what this offseason is really going to be about. My final question I have for you about this young core before we move forward, you mentioned a second guy that maybe if Cade weren't to come back better, that could be the best player. Are you speaking to Jaden Ivey here?
No, I didn't have anybody in particular in mind. It's more about if either Cade is the number one, because that's the position he occupied and was on the trajectory for before he got hurt and missed almost an entire season. Maybe he's your number one, and then that clarifies. If he's not your number one, I'm saying it might be the guy who comes via the lottery, because they might end up being the Wembanyama team. If they end up in the position to take Scoot Henderson, things get weird, because Scoot's going to be a primary ball handler probably, and you've already got Cunningham and Ivy. And what do you do if you land in that second spot where it's presumed that Scoot is the guy there? And they may disagree. They may think it's Brandon Miller or somebody else. But so a lot will depend on how the lottery balls settle in, right? Everything else that we could talk about, free agency, trades, the young guys that they already have and their trajectory, everything could change in an instant depending on how the lottery goes. But if they're not the Wembanyama team, there's a lot of other things in play there, right? So no, I don't know that it's clear who, if Cade is the presumed number one, or the de facto number one in a way, I don't know who the number two is at the moment. Probably Ivy. But we didn't even get a full season to see how their chemistry could evolve, right? And I think we saw, to use another example of a backcourt with 2 stars in it, and how that can be a challenge, but also a benefit. the Cavaliers, right? Like Darius Garland has a breakthrough season, becomes an all-star for the first time as a young player, bright future. Then they bring in Donovan Mitchell. Now, suddenly you have two guys, and in their case, undersized backcourt. The good news for the Pistons is that, Cade Cunningham's a big point guard. And if he's in a backcourt with Ivy, between the two of them, you got it all covered, right? In theory, you don't have a size deficit. The Cavs have a size problem. But at times, Donovan Mitchell is still doing all the great Donovan Mitchell things, and Garland's having his moments to shine. And then there's other times, including in the playoff series they lost to the Knicks, where you're going like, do these guys have they figured out how to play off of each other and leverage each other's talents, or are they just kind of still in that mode of, there'll be moments when this guy is primary, there'll be moments when that guy's primary. It's hard. And so that's why I say, like, you're probably not the Scoot Henderson destination if you ended up in position to pick him. And even with, Ivy as a guy who can do a lot with the ball in his hands, I still think there's a learning curve there for him and Cade. So it's really, really unfortunate. It's unfortunate Cade missed an entire season, regardless, or almost an entire season. It's really unfortunate in the sense that when you're a really young team and you're trying to, you want guys to take steps individually, but you're also trying to build that chemistry and that feel for each other, and they just got robbed of a whole season of that.
Yeah, it definitely, trust me. People that had to watch them every single game, it definitely made it a little bit more rough throughout the season with Cade being out for sure. But we're hoping, all of us here in Detroit, we're hoping that it was not for nothing, and Victor Wembanyama comes to Detroit. But when we come back, I want to get Howard's thoughts on the Pistons coaching search, which we do have some updated news on that. We'll talk about that when we come back. But first, I've got to tell you guys about one of our sponsors, PrizePicks. So there is now a new $1 million daily Superflex promotion with PrizePicks. Every day of the NBA playoffs finals, one PrizePicks user will win a chance at becoming a millionaire. One entry placed after 8 a.m. Eastern time will be randomly selected each day. Whoever placed that entry will be given a 6-pick flex with the following payouts. 6 correct picks is $1 million. 5 correct picks, $80,000. 4 correct picks, $16,000. Full details can be found at prizepicks.com/million. You must opt in at this link to be eligible for the $1 million entry. Once you opt in, all you have to do is play the game like normal, and you could be the lucky winner. Now, how does it work? You pick 2 to 6 players to see if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection. You can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. No competing against other people. It's just you versus projections available. PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you watch. Trust me, if you are thinking of a sport, it's on there. Esports, NBA, women's basketball, women's college sports, men's college sports. It's literally everything on there. You can find it. I promise you it's there. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's just that easy. Safe and fast withdrawals currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports today. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100 with PrizePicks. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons, hit that subscribe button, or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. All right, Howard. So there's been a lot of noise in the Pistons community about how this coaching search for the Pistons has been going since they decided to move Dwayne Casey up into whatever role. We never really got like a official role of what he is with the front office. I'm going to just call him an advisor in the front office as of right now. But we saw Houston go through his coaching search, and let's just keep it blank here. They got a lot more bigger names. They interviewed a lot more popular names, guys with head coaching experience, guys who were championship experience. Like, those are the kind of guys that the Houston Rockets interviewed. Then you go over and look at Detroit, and you got them interviewing up-and-coming assistants. You got them interviewing Charles Lee. You got them interviewing Jaren Collins. You heard Chris Quinn. You heard Brian Keefe. And then you also got someone that, people probably haven't heard of in close to a decade, and Kevin Ollie. That's a little bit of joking going on with my end. But Kevin Ollie is one of the finalists. We did get some news and update. We're recording this on May 8th. We got an update today that Kevin Ollie Jaren Collins and Charles Lee are heading out to LA to meet with Pistons owner Tom Gores because they are the 3 finalists. Without getting into that, you don't have to get all into that, but just what's your overall thought process on how the Pistons are handling their coaching search and the people they're going after and what they're doing with it compared to another rebuilding team like Houston, who's, like I said, interviewing Udoka. I believe they had interest in Nick Nurse, Kenny Atkinson, like guys like that. What's your thought process on that?
I mean, it's definitely fascinating to contrast the two candidate pools and how different a profile, if we're going to generalize about them, that those present. Some of this may have to do with, like I was trying to think about this. Some of this sometimes has to do with either your front office or ownership or both and their own personalities. And it kind of doesn't surprise me with what we know of Tillman Fertitta, the Rockets owner, that he was all in on names and on guys with established resumes. It's not necessarily right or wrong. He seems wired that way to make the bold move, the splashy move, the one that looks good on day one and may be good, period. I'm not saying it's only for show, but it does seem like that's part of his personality, is to want that. It also may be that if the rumors of James Harden's return to the Rockets, if the interest is there, and if the interest is mutual, and if they're really going to do this, I don't understand it for a minute, by the way, but whatever. It's their franchise to run and Harden's career to decide. Then you are presuming that you're accelerating your rebuild. You're saying we're done rebuilding. Whether our young guys are ready or not, we don't care. We're bringing in the former MVP to anchor us again, and everything else will fall into place once we have him. And by the way, I'll use terminology like that a lot. Like I'm a big believer in that. Not that Harden is the right guy to do that with at this stage of his career, but in general, once you have your North Star, everything else is a lot easier to figure out. So they do that. Everybody else will be just a little bit better. Everybody else has a little bit less on them. And maybe that's what leads you down the path to want to chase an Ime Udoka, a Nick Nurse, or other established guys, because you're telling them, listen, we're bringing in James Harden. He's coming back. I'm not saying that they know this, but they have an agenda that it seems like is that involves accelerating this thing by getting a star immediately. And I don't know if they're going to pull that off. They may not. Ime Udoka may be coaching the same, young, highly flawed, group that Silas did before he got fired. I mean, so there's that. The Pistons, by contrast, are, they're 3 finalists. Obviously, none of them have head coaching experience in the NBA. Kevin Ollie is the only one of the 3 who has any head coaching experience at any level. But they are all guys who have been highly regarded in NBA circles for some time. Kevin Ollie is interviewed for other head coaching jobs. He's been a guy who has been on that list of ones to watch for quite a while. He won a national championship at the college level. It's been a while, but still, they all have success, right? Charles Lee with a Bucks team that won a championship a couple of years ago. Jaren Collins was with the Warriors when they won won their championships. So like, they all bring a lot to the table in terms of experience on the bench. They're all unproven at this level. That's not necessarily a bad thing. To me, it kind of says that maybe what the Pistons are looking for is someone who's going to grow with this young group. And also that they're still taking a patient approach. That if they were really desperate, and I feel like the Rockets are kind of telegraphing a certain desperation, to be honest. The Pistons have had, less recent playoff success than the Rockets, to be, that's just the truth. But the Pistons don't seem to be quite as desperate to try to accelerate this immediately. Again, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I have the beholder. If you're a Pistons fan who's getting impatient, I don't blame you, but I think there is merit to saying we can't account for all the other failures of the last 10 or 15 years. Like it's been, I was looking it up earlier. They won a playoff series since 2008, was it?
Yeah, 2008.
And they haven't had a winning record since 2016. So you don't want to slow roll this too much, but you have a lot of really good young players that you just need to give some time to. And getting a new head coach who is young and unproven as a head coach, but has a lot of promise and has great ideas, and that you think can help accelerate this young group. grow with them, maybe that's the right way to go. And I always say, like, we can't prejudge a lot about assistant coaches who haven't been head coaches before. You have no idea. I've seen guys who were total unknowns who have great success from day one. I've seen guys who had, all of the, all the attributes that you'd think you would want in a head coach. They finally get their chance and they fall on their face. You just don't know until the guy actually gets the job and does it.
So you said a few things there that was really interesting. One of the things I really want to hammer down, and I feel like you kind of knew that this was going to be a little bit of a touchy subject, which is the impatience of Pistons fans. And I feel like that I don't feel like a lot of people have really mentioned it, but I think that was a really good point. Again, there's a little bit of a rivalry between like Pistons fans and Rockets fans, apparently. So let me just say this. I'm not trying to go at Rockets or Rockets fans or anything going on with Houston. But it does seem like that Houston's kind of saying next season we really want to, especially with the Harden rumors, like you said. It really feels like they're saying next season we're done with this. Like this is like not saying they're trying to compete for a championship, but this whole bottom of the league, being in the lottery constant, like seems like they're saying, hey, we're kind of sick of this. And with Detroit, at least along with the coaching search and some of the quotes that Weaver's had, and along with the moves that he's made, like acquiring James Wiseman, who has no experience basically in the NBA, had less minutes played when they acquired him than Jalen Duren, who's a rookie. Like doing stuff like that, I mean, that would have to signal, at least to me, that, hey, we want to get these guys reps. We want, give these guys time to develop. And then, like you mentioned, going after an unproven coach, a young coach, which all of them are. I believe Ollie's the oldest at 50. It really does seem like that they're trying to go with some guy that can grow with them. And they're not necessarily expecting immediate, they want to be better than this season, obviously. They don't want to be at the bottom of the league. They want to take a step, but they're not trying to take this big step, and they really want to grow organically, I'd say is the best word for me. So I think that is probably the case of what they're trying to do here. The last thing I'll say is this, and then I want to move on to our next segment. Last thing I'll say is I've been very vocal about these three finalists, so I'll just give you my opinion real quick just so you know where I stand with it. Yeah. I'm really cool with Charles Lee and Jaren Collins. They're assistant coaches. They've had experience in the NBA, maybe not as head coach, but at least have NBA experience dealing with NBA personalities, NBA players, etc., that kind of thing. Kevin Ollie, I'm very worried about Kevin Ollie being a finalist, because to me it seems like that he's getting this interview with Weaver because they go back to their OKC days, and he hasn't coached since 2018, and he hasn't had any NBA experience. Like a lot of people will bring up, like, Steve Kerr didn't have NBA experience. Well, he had experience as like a front office member. Like he had experience in the NBA. My only concern with Ollie is that he hasn't been coaching at all since 2018. How it went with UConn kind of spiraled out of control, and no other teams have really shown interest in him as an NBA guy since around 2015, which is, I think, was the last. I mean, I looked up as much as I could. I believe 2015 was around the last time we heard that he was getting like interest from the NBA. So all that kind of stuff combined makes me a little more concerned about him. But the other candidates, I don't have any real problems with them. They come from good trees, Bud and Kerr. I know Collins, I believe, was with the Pelicans this past season. So they come from good trees. They have experience in the NBA, even if it's not head coaching. So I'm cool with them. I do have a little concerns about Kevin Ollie, but I guess we'll see what happens. If you want to comment on that, I'll give you a chance to when we come back. But maybe Howard has something to say about that. But if not, we're going to also talk about what is some of his expectations, maybe some interesting things he'd like to see, some goals or something from the Pistons, either in this offseason or next season. Stay tuned for that. But first, you guys got to hear from some of our lovely sponsors. All right, I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons, hit that subscribe button, or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. Howard, did you have anything you wanted to say with that last point I made, or do you want to move on to the next topic?
No, listen, I mean, all fair, all interesting. I would just say, Kevin Ollie, as a guy who played in the NBA for, 12 or so years. I mean, like he knows NBA personalities, and he knows, he was, one of those consummate role players who played with a lot of stars over the course of his time in the league, including Kevin Durant. And I think he understands NBA personalities and egos and all that other stuff. How he be as a head coach again? Like I've known other guys who fit the profile of a Kevin Ollie, smart, great communicator, all these things as a role player in the NBA. And I've seen guys like that. And I've seen, like I said it before, it's gone both directions. I've seen it where it's like, yeah, I could totally see it. Like I see the outline of a head coach in this guy. And then it some of them fall on their face. Sometimes it works. You just don't know. Like it's impossible to, it's not quite as volatile as scouting for lottery picks where teams still blow the second pick of the draft or even the number one pick routine. But picking a head coach who has no track record, who's only been an assistant or who's only been a head coach at other levels, but not the NBA. It's almost, I don't want to say it's as big of a crapshoot, but
it's close to a crapshoot.
You just don't know. And a lot of times it has to do with, of course, the team that you're hiring them to coach to and what stage they're at. I would just say real quick as a reference point here, though, about Pistons fans and impatience and all that. I get it, but if I were in Troy Weaver's position, here's what I would also be looking at as I decide whether I'm all in this summer, whether it's on the coaching or personnel to try to make a big leap. You got 5 teams that are probably still locks for the playoffs next year: Boston, Milwaukee, Philly, Cleveland, New York. Miami is likely, unless they, for whatever reason, blew it up after this run. I don't think that's happening. So Miami's probably, and that's 6. The Hawks are going to make some moves, I think, but I don't think they're taking themselves out of the running. So that's 7. The Nets could go either direction. The Bulls could go either direction. The Raptors could go either direction. I don't know what the hell to make of Washington. And then you've got some other young teams that are on the rise, like the Pacers and Magic. It's crowded, is my point. You got a lot of teams to leapfrog. And so as you're looking at the landscape, and listen, a lot's going to happen between now and October. But as you're looking at the landscape, if you're the Pistons and you're saying, are we ready to make the jump right now? I would argue no. I would argue that the first leap is to just become competitive night in, night out and get into like the 35 win range, maybe, that your playoff move is maybe 2 seasons away still, because the top of the East is that strong right now. And look, there's always some surprises that happen, right? Some of the teams I mentioned that I assume are going to be playoff teams or pretty tightly in that mix. Somebody may have a massive injury. Somebody may just decide to unexpectedly hit the reset button or something. Somebody may demand a trade. James Harden could walk away from Philly to Houston, and Joel Embiid could say it's time to trade me. Who knows? That's something that people around the league speculate on occasionally. But in general, I don't think that there's a path for the Pistons right now to make that leap immediately. And if that's the case, then you have to take the sober-minded view, the more methodical, patient view, and say, what's our path forward in the near term that just moves us from bottom of the league to respectable? Because that's usually the first step anyway, right? You're rarely going from, worst direct record in the league to playoff team.
Yeah, and this is something I've talked about on the podcast before, and then we'll move on. But one of the main things, you kind of said it, is that I don't think the Pistons should be trying to aim for playoffs next year. What I believe they should be aiming to do is to be next year's Orlando Magic. How Orlando was this year. Orlando was very competitive. They saw growth from a lot of their young guys. They got their foundational guy to play the whole season, like we mentioned with Kay Cunningham. So to see the improvement of your young guys, be competitive day in, day out, like you mentioned, and be like how many wins did Orlando have? 33, 34 games. So be next year's Orlando Magic. You're not someone you can just walk over. If you take them lightly, they'll beat you in a given night. They're probably not going to make the playoffs, but you can clearly see that their future is bright. So that's where I believe the Pistons should be trying to aim to be next season. If they can be that, I think you're moving in the right direction. So my final question for you, Howard, we're running out of time here, but okay. I do want to ask you this. What are some, you can go expectations that you have for the Pistons this offseason or next season? You can go the route of what interests you most about the Pistons potentially this offseason or next season, or goals. Just what, I guess I was to say, what are you looking forward most to when you look over at the Detroit Pistons from this offseason and next season? What are you looking most forward to seeing possibly?
How they use their cap room. Cap room doesn't usually get you, like it's no longer the path to the superstar, right? Like it used to be, you save your cap room, you chase the superstars, you hope you land one, but it's always been a tougher road to do that as a smaller market team anyway, and the Pistons have not been a destination. But they're going to have somewhere 30, maybe even 40 million, depending on how things go in cap room. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to use that to sign a guy or a bunch of guys. You can acquire somebody in a lopsided trade. There's any number of ways to use the room, but they do have the resources to chase guys. And it's not like some huge free agent class, but there's some interesting names there. Like, I don't know. What if the Warriors start to go in a different direction and Draymond opts out and you could bring Draymond home to Michigan? Like, that's interesting. And I know people have often thought of Draymond and putting him in this box of like, well, it just works because he's with the Warriors. Like, no, Draymond can make your whole defense make sense, right? He's just in the same way that you look for a foundational offensive player who puts everybody else in their best positions to score. Draymond can transform your defense, even at this stage of his career. He's still at a very high level. And for all the other things that people may focus on with him on the negative side, I think the guy is a phenomenal leader and a phenomenal presence. Yes, he's had his issues, but I have immense respect for him. I don't know if that's the right move at the right time, by the way. You have a really young team, and I don't know if an all-in-ish type move on a player in his mid-30s is the way to go, but I don't know. It's just an interesting thought exercise. My buddy James Edwards at The Athletic had floated the idea at one point about, a Jeremy Grant reunion because of the need, obviously, for wing D and veterans, a 3-and-D guy, which also just got me thinking about other guys that are on the market, right? I don't know that you're going all in to chase, like, say, Cam Johnson, who's with the Nets right now. I assume they're going to go all out to keep him, given that they gave up Kevin Durant to get him and Mikal Bridges. And then like Josh Hart, Chris Middleton, Dylan Brooks, like all these like 3-and-D type wings or defensive minded wings who could help shore up your perimeter D and bring some veteran stability and influence. They're all interesting names. You don't want to over index on any of these guys. And like, when I say leadership, I'm kind of leaving Dylan Brooks out of that part of it, by the way. But Dylan Brooks, to his credit, is a guy who kind of helped carve out the personality of this young Grizzlies team that he apparently is not going to be brought back to. So again, I know there's some downside there, but maybe he's ready to kind of evolve a little bit. And meanwhile, the ferocity that he brings, that edge he brings, can actually help a young team sometimes, because sometimes a young team needs somebody to help kickstart them, and you need a little snarl. You just got to have it channeled in the right way and have the right environment for it. I don't know if they're the right environment for it or not. I'm not suggesting they are. I'm just, as I started the thought process of like who makes sense, who's potentially available this summer, those are some of the guys I thought about.
So we're going to go ahead and wrap up the podcast after this, but Cam Johnson at the top of my list. The Pistons had the worst wing room in the entire NBA, in my opinion. The defense, at least, had the worst wing defense in the NBA. Cam Johnson, 3-and-D guy, movement shooter offensively as well, has a different type of gravity. That's a guy I really would like to get if I was the Pistons, but he is a restricted free agent, like you mentioned with Brooklyn. It's going to be tough to get him from Brooklyn. Dylan Brooks is someone we're going to talk about on the podcast in a few days, so stay tuned for that, everybody. There is definitely a compelling argument for him. He's an interesting player for sure. But there are a few like low-key wing names in the free agency, not big names like you mentioned, but there are a few low-key wing guys that maybe you can get for like $10 to $15 million that should be able to help with what the Pistons need. Another one of those guys I think would be a really like low-key sign, may not even get that much probably, is like a Utah Watanabe. Like he can shoot threes, he's long, he'll play defense, and he just will spot up in the corner. Like that's the kind of thing the Pistons just need. And the defense, they need some size desperately on the wing, and hopefully that gets addressed in the draft maybe if they don't get Wemby. But definitely how they address their cap space for sure. I hope it goes all out for the wings, because the wing, again, like I said, it was pretty putrid to watch this season. It was tough, but that's all we've got today, man. Appreciate you, Howard, for joining us, man. It was a lot of fun. Really do appreciate you taking time out of your day to come on here. Make sure you guys go follow him on Twitter at Howard Beck. Again, he's a current contributor to GQ Sports, and you'll probably find him on some other Locked On shows if you want to catch him over there. I believe he's going to be on Locked On NBA at some point, so definitely check that out. But thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button at the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review whenever podcast platform you're listening to this on. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Stay safe. Enjoy these playoffs. These playoffs are crazy. Make sure you guys are tuned into these playoff games. And until next time, see you guys later. Peace out.